presentation. It was regarding the application of human performance technology in online education. My name is Nelson Masinde, a PhD student at Liberty University. We're going to be examining how to apply human performance technology techniques in online education. Online education has pretty much taken over the education world in many different ways, particularly during the pandemic, as we've had to adjust and adapt to new systems and new ways of presenting information. Students have also had to adapt and adjust their ability to receive information. Teachers have had to learn new ways of acclimating to the online world. Not only were they forced to get onto Zoom and certain other features to be able to teach online, they also had to figure out how to display information online, how to use online tools. This makes the area of HPT even that much more relevant when it comes to its being adopted into the online education. So we're going to be examining what features need to be examined or what areas need to be focused on. We'll start off by defining what human performance technology is. So it's a term that's thrown around several times and in many different ways, different forums, but we need to have a clear definition of it in order to be able to understand what we're trying to achieve. Human performance technology has been around for a long time. And as with anything that's been around for a while, there's always going to be several different ways to define it and several different practitioners who give it a different and slightly new definition. I'm going by a definition by Kang in a 2018 paper that says HPT is best defined as a field of endeavor that seeks to bring about changes to a system in such a way that the system is improved in terms of the achievements it values. So we're going to be working with this definition. And if you break it down, you realize that it's discussing the fact that HPT endeavors to bring about changes to a system. And in this case, we're examining online education as a system. Online education has been around for a little while. The history of online education may go as far back as the internet starting, when people could send emails and be able to communicate on the World Wide Web. But over time, the system has changed, the system has advanced, the system has become much more usable. And therefore now we have to examine what changes to the system need to be adopted so as to improve and cause the system to create better achievements. The achievements that are valued by online education are basically similar achievements to what's valued in a real face-to-face, in-person education. But working with this definition, we're going to be looking at how do we apply HPT principles in order to effectively improve the online education system so that we're getting the achievements that are valued in online education. We start by asking this question: why is it needed in online education? Why do we need HPT? And there are three different ways to define this. The first one is to ensure consistency and effectiveness of learning. So learning online can become very spread out and very, very ineffective because there's so many practitioners. Everybody is an expert at what they do. And that's, of course, expert in quotations. Any individual could write a Wikipedia article, for example. Any individual could create a website and write some information on there. And any individual could make a YouTube video and try to teach people the things that they want to teach them. That does not mean that every individual that's doing all those things is the expert. And it doesn't mean that the information that they're sharing is a true fact. So application of HPT principles helps to ensure that the information that people are learning is effective. And then the second part is that it's consistent. because history, for example, it does not change just because we're using the internet. History does not alter itself because the modus operandi, so to speak, or the way people are learning it has changed. It remains the same. Mathematics, same. Science, same. So all these different subjects that people are learning online will not change simply because they're using a different modus operandi. So the first reason to apply HPT principles is because we want to ensure consistency and effectiveness of learning. The second reason is to create the most effective learning environment. Now, I'm a firm believer that the internet has enhanced and created better avenues for us to learn things faster and better, and for us to share information at the speed of light, literally. But the problem can become that since information is being shared so rapidly, we're not finding what's the most effective learning environment. The most effective learning environment is not the one that's fastest, but it's the one that relays the most accurate information in the most efficient way, and most importantly, allows the learner to learn. And if we're measuring everything, we measure success by the ability of the learner to learn, then we are trying to figure out what's the most effective learning environment for that learner. Some learners do well online, independent learning, like we do at Liberty University Online. But some learners do better in a classroom setting. Some do better with manipulatives and certain other tools that they can use. But HPT principles will be applied in order to figure out how to create the most effective learning environment based on the individual learner. The third reason is to enhance the implementation and delivery of learning systems. So the internet world has been changing and advancing very quickly. But of course, we don't want to get stuck in archaic systems just because they deliver. We always want to be innovating, and we always want to be figuring out what's the best, what's the latest, what's the greatest thing that's out there. So as we apply HPT principles to online education, it'll force us to figure out if there are better ways, or at least to evaluate if there are better ways of doing certain things. It is a common practice sometimes to not to try to change anything if you feel like things are working well. HPT principles and the practice of applying them will force practitioners, education practitioners, to frequently evaluate their systems and figure out how to enhance them and how to do better implementation. Case in point, here at Liberty University, we were using Blackboard and now we're using Canvas. And I find the Canvas system to be much more user-friendly, much easier to navigate for a student, and much better to use in terms of knowing where your lessons are and following through the different modules. That is an example of an institution looking at the delivery system and the implementation system and saying, could we do this better? And finding that, yes, Canvas can deliver this information a lot better than Blackboard. Just from me as a student, Canvas is a lot better. It gets my vote. So those are the three reasons why we need HPT in online learning: consistency and effectiveness of learning, most effective learning environment, and enhanced implementation and delivery of learning systems. In research, what I decided to do is to apply the HPT principles using the ADDIE method, the ADDIE model: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. And what I'm proposing essentially is that at every stage of developing, you apply HPT principles. And if you continually apply that and figure out how the human performance technology will be affected at every stage, then when you finish with the design and development of curriculum or instruction, you don't have to worry about the effectiveness and you don't have to worry about the HPT aspect of it. So my proposal is that as you go through all these steps, you basically apply HPT principles at each stage while creating online curriculum and online courses. Just as a quick review, the ADDIE model involves analysis. In analysis, you're analyzing the situation and you're trying to figure out what gaps are there that need to be filled. And one of the questions that's being asked during analysis is also if instruction or curriculum or our new module or learning system is the solution. The next step is design. Based on the analysis, you figure out what needs to be designed, what's the right solution, and if it works for the necessary need. And then, of course, you move on to development. You start developing the learning system based on your analysis and your design principles, and you figure out what needs to be developed and how it needs to be developed. And then eventually you want to implement. You want the learners to be able to take the course. You want it to be applied in a practical setting so that they can be able to make use of it and figure out if it's effective or not. The last step is evaluation. So with evaluation, you're trying to figure out the effectiveness. You're trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what needs fixing, what needs changing, what needs correction. And so these 5 steps I felt gave a holistic picture of what instructional designers need to be looking at every step of the way when designing instruction. So now we'll turn over to applying HPT principles to this model. We'll start with the analysis stage. The analysis stage is where you're deciding several different things. So this step is intended to evaluate the necessity of instruction and apply the most appropriate solution. Now remember that the most appropriate solution sometimes might not be curriculum design, might not be instruction. It might be that the employee simply needs to sit down with their manager and go through an evaluation, an individual evaluation. It might be that certain systems need to be changed so that certain practices are eliminated. It might be that certain schedules and certain workflows need to be changed. So the analysis stage needs to be approached with an open mind, figuring out if instruction is really a solution. Many organizations jump to conclusions and waste a lot of resources chasing the wrong problem and thereby achieving the wrong results or no results at all. Because a lot of times, if there's a problem, training tends to be the immediate solution. So the analysis stage kind of it's a stopgap measure that stops everything and says, well, let's analyze the problem. What are we dealing with here? And then let's figure out if instruction is the solution. HPT can be applied to this stage to figure out what the performance of the employees is or what the performance of the affected parties is. What is it that they're lacking? And as you apply that, you begin to figure out a lot better during the analysis stage what the solution is and how to move forward. HPT is a field that needs to be focused on early and often within the life cycle of any organization, especially when a problem arises. So the analysis stage is going to be a very important key place to begin to apply HPT principles, because at that point is when you start to separate the two and say we need training for this and we need other things for other solutions for other problems. And then move on to the design phase where you begin to figure out what will be the best method of roasting the meat. I like to use that analogy because there are many ways of roasting meat. And if it's in front of you, you want to figure out what the best way is for the learner. For example, when you go to the restaurant and you order steak, you're going to be asked, how do you want it cooked? Because there's several different ways they can cook the steak. But they don't want to just cook it the way they want to cook it. They want to cook it the way you like it. So here we begin to involve the learner very deeply and understand what is it that causes them to learn best. Is it a collaboration within a team? Is it individualized learning online? Is it a classroom setting with an instructor? Is it a reading material and then being tested? Analyze the learner to figure out what the best method of roasting the meat is. Do they like it well done, medium well, rare, medium rare, or do they just like it medium? Once you figure that out, You are trying to figure out the learner's ability to receive information and generate the desired output. You're also measuring, can they give you the feedback that you're looking for at the end of the day? HPT techniques can be applied at this stage to evaluate the process, to see how the design process is being applied. How has it been applied historically? How has it been applied now? And is this working? Is it effective? For example, if you go in and ask certain sets of questions, and those questions are not necessarily telling you the right answers to figure out how to design systems and to design e-learning, then the questions probably need to be changed. HPT principles will intervene and help bring that to light. The problem might be the way you're going about your design process, the way you are asking questions, the way you're doing your research with employees might be the cog in the wheel that's creating issues. The right application here will save you a ton of pain and a ton of trouble later, because learning that's designed right will produce the right results. Learning that's not designed the right way will do just the opposite. So once we've gone over this hurdle, which may be the biggest one, we move on to development. Development is when you begin to now create, of course, the course itself, the outlines, and put in the content and figure out what needs to go in and what may not be necessarily in it. So in an article by Noor et al. in 2018, they discussed some of the things that need to be considered whenever we're developing online learning. And we've listed some of them here that are very important. It must be developed with these factors in mind, otherwise the development process can be lost in the middle of it. So we have to figure out the study environment. What's the study environment that they're going to be studying in? Sometimes businesses will decide that employees need to go home and do their learning independently at home and not in the work environment, because there may be distractions, emails coming in, people popping up at their desk and asking questions. There may be lunch breaks and all kinds of other things, meetings and things going on within the office environment. So give employees PTO and tell them that you're spending the next 3 days studying and reading on this, taking the test, and done, you can come back into the office. So in proper study environment, you need to figure out if the study environment is going to be appropriate. Inequality in the availability of resources. So if people don't have the access to the internet or access to the modules, access to the system, access to the technology that they need, then it's going to cause some problems. Insufficient online study materials. If you don't have enough materials for them to study online, if the systems are not set up for people to do it at home as well as in the office, then you're just forcing them to have to take office time to be able to do it. Slow internet speed. Some of the things that we don't think too much about in terms of if somebody doesn't have internet access at their house. Now, I'm talking in terms of employees here, but let's think more of an international organization, or say we're implementing something that's more of a consumer-based tool that we're sending to other countries where internet speeds and internet issues may be a bigger deal. Leave alone other countries. We've had this issue when it came to online learning during the pandemic. And certain areas, certain parts of the country, there was no broadband, there was no internet access. And so some students were forced to have to find a library or find another convenient spot to be able to learn. So these are things that, of course, we didn't have time to consider, but things that need to be seriously considered in order to be able to be effective in the development. So as you're developing the learning systems, you're trying to figure out how much internet speed will this need? How much study material will be online, and how much can people handle in terms of glaring at a screen and studying this information? How much of it needs to be verbal so people can listen to some of it? How much of it needs to be video so they can at least watch some video, read some, and listen to some? how do you split it all up to make it very effective? And that's what brings us to the load shedding part. Are people going to be able to handle the amount of information and the type of information and the way it's conveyed? Thus, HPT applies in this process because you begin to measure the correlation between the development processes and the end user. And as you measure those two and you blend them together, you begin to see the gaps and to see the things that need to be fixed and corrected. The next step in the ADDIE method is evaluation. So once everything has been implemented and it's running, you give it some time and now you begin to evaluate. HPT principles are probably going to be, the next step is implementation. So we're implementing the system. HPT principles are applied during this stage to ensure the implementation of courses provides an opportunity for the most effective outcome. So some of these bleed into each other, but of course we're trying to separate them to see how we can apply HPT at each stage. Implementation takes into consideration the means as well as the methodology. That's very important. Implementation is not just looking at what is being implemented or what's being pushed out, but also the method with which it's being implemented. Are we requiring people to only use laptops, desktops, or can they also use tablets and cell phones? Because in certain places, people have access to internet based on their phone because the phone has cellular service and they may not be in an area where there's internet. So we're thinking about the means of implementation as well as the method of implementation. We're also considering, are there any additional resources that people might need? Might they need to do extra research on the internet? Might they need to be able to have a book in addition to the resources that we're providing? Will they need to have audio, meaning we have to tell them that you need, if you're using a cell phone, there's parts of this that are audio, and you're going to need some headphones if you're in a public place. Will they need to have access to video? Because for some resources, people may be able to read content, but they can't really see anything or watch a video. So all these are things that are considered during the implementation stage, thinking about the methodology, not just the means. The other factor that I discovered reading research from implementation of online learning in Afghanistan schools was that the teachers as well as the students needed to be trained. One of the things that happens when it comes to technology is a lot of times the assumption is made that we can implement new systems and quickly onboard teachers so that they can in turn go around and get the students working on it. Well, we discovered a lot of new things during this pandemic particularly. Now in this particular research, they realized that a lot of the teachers, especially the older teachers, were not very quick to adapt to technological advances. And therefore they were hesitant to jump into online learning. Then you had a group of teachers who were very quick to adapt to them and they were quick to learn the new systems and be able to use them. Now, if the teacher cannot adapt to the system, it's going to be very difficult for the students to adopt. Now, because younger people tend to adopt technology a lot quicker, some of the students might get on board quickly, but at the same time, it's going to be difficult because the teacher is the one leading the classroom. So we must consider in implementation the training that it needs to be done for the teachers in turn so that they can train the students. A lot of times that step is skipped or glossed over because we make the assumption that teachers are going to pick up on things quickly. Both the teacher and the student need to be effectively trained on the effective use of these tools. And HPT principles can be applied here to evaluate how this has been done in the past and what the plans are for doing it in the future. And this means setting aside a time to be able to onboard the teachers, for example. And in an organizational setting means getting the management on board and making sure they understand how the system works before then expecting them to go and transfer that knowledge to other people. So once we finish implementation, I was ahead of myself there, then we finally move on to evaluation. Evaluation, according to Selwyn and in a paper, in 2019 discusses 6 different areas. And I like the summary of this because it kind of sums up what the evaluation process looks like. Performance evaluation is a common thing in many organizations. It's a common thing in education. It's a common thing in every area of life generally. Because evaluation is the only thing that allows you to figure out what you did well, what you can do better. So an evaluation can look at 6 areas. One, what are the new forms of education, inclusion and exclusion? Who's being included in terms of the technology that's being used? Who's being excluded as a result of the technology that's being used? So HPT principles are applied in this setting to be able to see what's been successful, what's worked well, what can be done better. But the first thing you're looking at when you have a new form of education, are there people that are being excluded? Again, I keep using the example of pandemic because it is the most recent example that we have, where we've had stories being told of children that have been excluded from the learning process as a result of technology being the only means by which they could access education. So that's a key factor of applying HPT principles in terms of the future and seeing how can this be done better in the future. Second thing is platform economics in an age of artificial intelligence. So in an age of AI, we have different platforms that we can use. Can we find the ones that are free? For example, Zoom did very well in this last season because they had a free interface, and then to be able to get more time on it and all that, you had to do paid version. But they provided a free resource that for anybody could jump on. But the other thing that made it easy, because of the age of AI where things are very automated, they tried to automate a lot of processes so that it makes it easier for the user to just jump on and bam, the video is up and you're talking to somebody. So what are the economics? How much does it cost? How much time will it take? Are you going to use something as simple as Zoom that takes less time to train, or something more complicated that may take a longer time to onboard? So the economics in that have to be evaluated as well. Divisions of learning across humans and machines. The human factor cannot be ignored. How do we still make sure that the machines are not taking over the whole process, but the human element is still involved? In some cases, it's completely asynchronous in terms of people onboarding and working through processes themselves. But even in those situations, my recommendation is that they have a human being, a human voice, maybe a video, maybe a voice. Somebody recorded that reads certain sections, and a video to show them certain real people, like interviews, instead of just having text, because the human element is still very important in the learning process. IT industry acts as the leading educational force. I like this factor because what's happened over time is IT has become the central part of producing and conveying educational material. And so IT industry actors, companies such as Microsoft, companies such as Cisco, companies such as Dell, are the ones who are taking the center stage in terms of producing educational material. HPT principles must be applied, and these companies must understand that they're producing material that's going to be used in classrooms, and therefore it has to have certain educational values still intertwined and not just be full-on market value based. Fifth one is reimagining forms of edtech suitable for an age of climate change. This is a consideration that's just being sensitive with the environment. What are things that can be recycled and reused and reimagined in different ways so that we're not just creating a lot of waste. And lastly, finding alternatives. Soldier economies, convivial technology, respectful design. There are different varieties of alternatives that can be used to make this more effective. So HPT principles can be applied here to be able to create a more robust system and to evaluate so that the next time we create instruction, it's a lot better, or to go back and correct what you've already created. And finally, I found an interesting article that discussed, made a case for a scholars guild. And this was simply to say that the area of human performance technology needs to have people that focus their time studying it. Every field of study needs a focus group of academics to make it effective for the long term. Just like you have scientists who go to the universities, build whole entire departments to just do research on certain areas of science, and you have the humanities as well, where people spend a lot of time studying certain parts of that. The area of human performance technology deserves to have something like that. So this entire paper was devoted to making a case for a scholars guild. And I thought it was a very important piece for me to add here because everything we're discussing here is how to add HPT to online learning, and a scholars guild would help support that process very effectively. This research was developed to help enhance and sustain the field of human performance technology. The goal was to find viable solutions to help strengthen the field and not allow it to become ineffective. And it's pretty much proposed that it will have certain scholars that are dedicated to studying this field. The application of HPT principles is an absolute necessity in the field of online education. It allows the instructional designer to effectively review the necessity of instruction, the best methodology, the best design, the best implementation, and then finally evaluate its effectiveness. Online learning is growing exponentially with no sign of slowing down at any time soon. It is therefore essential to apply HPT to this field for effective outcomes to be generated. It's going to continue to be a growing field, and it's going to be a field that needs a lot of research and a lot of application in order to be sustained and to be effective. That's all I have, and I hope that we learn together how to effectively apply HPT to online education.